The morning sun filtered through the maple trees that lined Crescent Hill Drive, casting dappled shadows across the perfect lawns of Oak Ridge Estates. I remember the day I moved in like it was yesterday, not 3 years ago. The moving truck had barely pulled away when neighbors appeared with welcome baskets and warm smiles. This neighborhood seemed like the perfect slice of suburban heaven, a place where I could finally put down roots after years of apartment living. The crown jewel of Oak Ridge Estates was undoubtedly the sprawling green space that wound through the development like a ribbon of emerald. Mature oak trees provided shade over winding paths, and seasonal flowers bloomed in carefully tended beds. It was this green space that had ultimately convinced me to sign on the dotted line and commit to the slightly higher mortgage payment. The thought of having such a beautiful natural area just steps from my front door was irresistible. Max came into my life just 2 weeks after I moved in. I had not planned on adopting a dog so soon, but one visit to the local shelter changed everything. There he was, a 2-year-old golden retriever with soulful brown eyes that seemed to look right through me. The shelter volunteer explained that his previous owners had surrendered him when they moved to an apartment that did not allow pets. How anyone could give up such a gentle soul was beyond my understanding. Within an hour, the paperwork was complete, and Max had a forever home. Our morning walks became a sacred ritual. Every day at 6:30, rain or shine, Max and I would set out to explore the community trails. There was something magical about those early hours, the world still quiet except for birdsong, the air crisp and full of promise. Max would trot beside me, occasionally stopping to investigate an interesting scent or greet another early-rising dog walker. Those walks grounded me, preparing me for whatever challenges the workday might bring. The Homeowners Association was merely a background presence during those first months. Yes, there were monthly newsletters outlining community events and seasonal reminders about lawn care standards. Yes, I dutifully paid my HOA fees each quarter, but I hardly ever thought about the organization that governed our neighborhood with its thick binder of covenants, conditions, and restrictions. The rules seemed reasonable enough, designed to maintain property values and community aesthetics. I complied without complaint, grateful for the well-maintained common areas and the sense of order they provided. I first met Patricia Morgan, the HOA president, at the annual summer picnic. She was a tall woman with perfectly coiffed silver hair and a smile that never quite reached her eyes. She moved through the gathering like a queen surveying her realm, commenting on recent home improvements and subtly reminding residents of upcoming deadlines for seasonal decorations. "You must be Michael from 1432, she said when she reached me, extending a hand with impeccably manicured nails. "I have heard about your beautiful golden retriever. You know, we take our pet policies very seriously here in Oak Ridge Estates." There was something in her tone that made me pause, a hint of warning beneath the pleasant exterior. But I smiled and nodded, assuring her that Max was well behaved and that I always cleaned up after him. She seemed satisfied, but as she walked away, I noticed her eyes lingering on Max, who was happily accepting treats from children at a nearby picnic table. I dismissed the moment as inconsequential, unaware that it was the first rumble of the storm that was about to engulf my peaceful life. The months passed in comfortable routine. I established friendships with several neighbors, particularly the Johnsons next door and the elderly couple across the street who always saved treats for Max. Life in Oak Ridge Estates was everything I had hoped for when I purchased my home: safe, beautiful, and community-oriented. The green space remained our favorite place, especially the wooded trail that ran along the northern boundary of the development. Max and I explored every inch of it through changing seasons, from spring wildflowers to autumn foliage. It never occurred to me that our daily journeys through this shared paradise could possibly be problematic. I never imagined that the simple act of walking my dog would set in motion a chain of events that would transform our lives and the entire community around us. The official Oak Ridge Estates Homeowners Association envelope arrived on a Tuesday afternoon. White with the association logo embossed in green, it looked like the quarterly newsletter or perhaps a notice about the upcoming holiday decoration contest. I tossed it on the kitchen counter and forgot about it until after dinner, when Max nudged my hand as I sorted through the day's mail. When I finally opened it, my heart stopped. Not a newsletter, not a friendly reminder. A violation notice. The paper was heavy, official, with the word violation stamped in bold red letters across the top. Below it, in cold, impersonal language, was a citation for unauthorized pet activity in restricted common areas, with a fine of $500 due within 30 days. I read the notice 3 times, certain there must be some mistake. Max and I had walked the same paths every day for years without incident. How could this suddenly be a violation? My confusion quickly gave way to anger as I continued reading. The citation included dates and times, specific mornings when someone had apparently documented our walks along the wooded trail at the northern edge of the green space. Someone had been watching us, someone had been taking notes. The letter referenced Section 8, Paragraph C of the Covenants, Conditions, and Restrictions document, a section about pet restrictions that I had clearly overlooked when reviewing the massive binder upon moving in. My hands were shaking as I retrieved the binder from my office shelf, its weight suddenly oppressive as I placed it on my desk. It took nearly an hour of searching before I found the relevant section. There it was, in small print, a rule stating that pets were prohibited in designated conservation areas within community green spaces. The wooded trail we loved so much apparently fell into this category, but what struck me as odd was a notation at the bottom of the page. Amendment approved January 15th, just 3 months ago. This rule was new. Sleep eluded me that night. I lay awake, mind racing, as Max snored softly at the foot of my bed. $500 was significant, almost equal to the monthly HOA fee itself. But beyond the financial hit was the principle of the matter. Why had this rule changed? Why had residents not been clearly notified? And who had been monitoring my morning routine closely enough to document specific violations? The next morning, I called the HOA management company listed on the letterhead. After navigating a labyrinth of automated menus, I finally reached a human being, a woman named Sharon whose voice remained clinically detached throughout our conversation. The amendment was included in the January newsletter, she informed me when I questioned the notification process. All residents are responsible for staying informed about updates to community regulations. I remembered the January newsletter, a digital document that had arrived while I was traveling for work. I had skimmed it for important dates, but had clearly missed this critical change. Could you explain the reasoning behind this new restriction? I asked, struggling to keep my voice level. The wooded trail has always been open to everyone, including dog walkers. The board determined that pet activity was negatively impacting the natural environment in conservation areas, Sharon replied, as if reading from a script. The decision was unanimous. But there has never been an issue before. My dog stays on the path. I always clean up after him. Sir, I do not make the rules. I simply enforce them. The violation stands and payment is expected within the time frame indicated. My frustration mounting, I asked the question that had been gnawing at me since opening the letter. How exactly were these violations documented? Has someone been watching me? There was a pause before Sharon answered. The association has implemented a neighborhood watch program. Community members report violations they observe. Multiple residents have reported your activities. My neighbors, people I waved to each morning, people I had helped with groceries and snow shoveling, had been reporting me for walking my dog. The betrayal stung more than the fine itself. As I hung up the phone, I noticed movement across the street. Patricia Morgan stood at her front window, watching my house. When our eyes met, she did not look away. Instead, she raised her coffee mug in what felt like a mocking toast before letting her curtain fall back into place. That evening, I found the HOA meeting schedule on their website. The next meeting was in 2 weeks. I circled the date on my calendar, pressing so hard with my pen that it tore through the paper. If they wanted a fight, they were going to get one. I was not going to roll over and accept this injustice without at least making my voice heard. The Oak Ridge Estates Community Center was a modern building with soaring ceilings and walls of windows that normally made the space feel open and welcoming. But on the night of the HOA meeting, it felt more like a courtroom, sterile, intimidating, and charged with tension. Rows of folding chairs faced a raised platform where a long table awaited the board members. A podium with a microphone stood to one side, positioned so that anyone addressing the board would face both the leadership and their neighbors simultaneously. Exposed, vulnerable. I arrived 15 minutes early, clutching a folder containing the violation notice, relevant sections of the HOA bylaws, and my prepared statement. The room was already half full. I recognized most of the faces: the retired couple from the corner house, the young family with twins from 2 streets over, the fitness enthusiast who jogged past my house every afternoon. People nodded politely as I entered, but there was something different in their eyes now. Knowledge, judgment, division. I chose a seat near the back, watching as more residents filed in. The energy in the room shifted perceptibly when Patricia Morgan entered, flanked by 4 other board members. Patricia wore a navy blue blazer with the HOA logo pin gleaming on her lapel. Her silver hair was pulled back in a severe bun that emphasized her sharp cheekbones and the tightness around her mouth. The board members took their places at the table, arranging their materials with practiced precision. Robert Chen, the board secretary, was a mild-mannered accountant whose house boasted the most meticulously maintained lawn in the neighborhood. Beside him sat Diane Winters, a retired school principal whose garden had won the Community Beautification Award 3 years running. Thomas Bradford, the treasurer, was a corporate lawyer whose booming voice carried across the room even when he was speaking quietly. The final board member was Susan Miller, the newest addition, a young mother who seemed perpetually overwhelmed by her position. Patricia called the meeting to order exactly on time, her voice crisp and authoritative as she moved through the standard agenda items. Approval of previous minutes, treasurer's report, updates on the playground renovation project. All the while, I sat with my hands clenched around my folder, waiting for the open forum portion of the meeting when residents could address concerns. When Patricia finally announced the open forum, I was not the only one who raised a hand. 3 other residents were recognized before me. The first complained about holiday decorations still lingering on some homes despite the February 1st removal deadline. The second requested clarification on the approved plant list for front yards. The third, to my surprise, brought up concerns about the new pet restrictions, mentioning that the wooded trail had historically been a favorite spot for dog owners. Patricia dismissed this concern with practiced ease. The conservation area requires special protection. The board's decision is final and in the best interest of preserving natural resources for all residents. Finally, it was my turn. My heart pounded as I approached the podium, the weight of dozens of eyes following my progress across the room. I placed my materials on the podium surface, took a deep breath, and began. Good evening. My name is Michael Anderson from 1432 Crescent Hill Drive. I am here to address the recent violation, notice I received for walking my dog in what has now been designated as a restricted conservation area. For 3 years, my dog Max and I have walked the wooded trail daily without incident. This new restriction was implemented with minimal notification to residents, and the $500 fine seems excessive for an activity that has never before been problematic. I paused, making eye contact with various board members. Susan Miller looked down at her notepad, avoiding my gaze. I would like to request a reasonable accommodation to allow responsible pet owners continued access to the trail, perhaps with additional guidelines for staying on marked paths and proper waste disposal. Many residents chose this community specifically for the green spaces available. And Patricia interrupted me, her voice slicing through my prepared statement. Mr. Anderson, the board is well aware of your violation history. This is not merely about one instance of walking your dog where it is not permitted. I blinked, caught off guard. Violation history. This is the first notice I have ever received. Patricia smiled thinly, opening a folder in front of her. We have documented at least 12 separate occasions when your golden retriever was in the restricted area. Additionally, there have been complaints about barking. This was news to me. Max was one of the quietest dogs in the neighborhood. Barking. Max hardly ever barks. Who made these complaints? Our reporting system is confidential to protect residents who step forward, Thomas Bradford interjected, his lawyer voice projecting authority. Patricia nodded and continued, her eyes now locked with mine. The board has a responsibility to all residents, not just pet owners. Some of us find dogs to be a nuisance, disruptive, messy, potentially dangerous. Something in her tone made me pause. This felt personal, beyond a simple enforcement of rules. Do you have something against dogs specifically, Ms. Morgan? The room grew silent. Patricia's expression hardened. My personal feelings are irrelevant. The rules exist for a reason, Mr. Anderson. The fine stands. But I had struck a nerve. I could see it in the slight flush creeping up her neck, the tightening of her grip on her pen. Before I could respond, a voice called out from the middle of the room. I support the restriction. My children play in that area, and I am tired of watching for dog waste. It was Helen Wilson from Oakleaf Lane, a woman I had previously considered friendly. Another voice joined in. Those woods should be a natural area, not a dog park. To my dismay, several heads nodded in agreement. The room had chosen sides, and I was clearly outnumbered. I tried one more time. I am simply asking for reasonable discussion about a significant change that affects many homeowners who. The matter is closed, Patricia declared, slamming her gavel down with unnecessary force. The violation stands. The fine is due as stated. Next item of business. I stood frozen at the podium, humiliation burning through me. So much for democracy in action. So much for community. I gathered my materials with trembling hands and returned to my seat for the remainder of the meeting, unable to focus on anything being said. As the meeting adjourned and people began filing out, I lingered, waiting for the crowd to thin. Patricia was speaking with Thomas in low tones near the exit when I approached. Ms. Morgan, may I have a word in private? She dismissed Thomas with a nod and turned to me, arms crossed defensively across her chest. The meeting is over, Mr. Anderson. I just want to understand something. This feels targeted. Is there something specific about me or my dog that has caused this issue?" Patricia's professional mask slipped for just a moment. "Not everything is about you. Some of us have worked very hard to create order and standards in this community. People like you move in thinking the rules are optional, thinking your pets are more important than community guidelines. People like me. I have followed every rule in this neighborhood since day one." She stepped closer, her voice dropping to a near whisper. "Then pay your fine and start following this one too. I have worked too hard to let this community deteriorate because of pets running wild." Max does not run wild. He is always leashed, always controlled. Something flashed in her eyes, an old pain perhaps, or a deeply held conviction. That is what everyone says until their perfect pet is not so perfect anymore. The decision stands, and let me make something very clear. The board will be watching very closely for any further violations. From anyone. The threat in her voice was unmistakable. As she walked away, her heels clicking sharply on the polished floor, I stood alone in the community center, the weight of defeat heavy on my shoulders. But beneath the humiliation and frustration, something else was taking root: determination. This was not over, not by a long shot. The morning after the HOA meeting, I called in sick to work. My mind was too preoccupied with the previous night's confrontation to focus on spreadsheets and client meetings. Instead, I converted my dining table into a research station, spreading out maps of Oak Ridge estates that I had dug out of my closing documents, along with printouts of county property records that I had found online. Max sensed my mood, staying close by rather than settling in his usual sunbeam by the window. Every so often, he would nudge my hand with his nose, as if reminding me that whatever battle we were fighting it together. The HOA had overplayed their hand with their unreasonable fine and dismissive attitude. Now I was motivated to understand exactly what rights they actually had, and more importantly, what rights I had as a homeowner. If I was going to fight back, I needed information, facts, legal standing. I started with the community plat map, the official drawing that showed all property lines, easements, and common areas within the development. Something had been bothering me about the wooded trail, about how it seemed to run along the very edge of the neighborhood rather than through its center like the main green spaces. The plat map confirmed my suspicion. The trail ran right alongside the development boundary. Next, I pulled up the County GIS, Geographic Information System, website, which allowed public access to property boundaries and ownership information. After several hours of cross-referencing maps and property records, I discovered something interesting. The wooded trail that had been designated as a conservation area actually bordered an undeveloped parcel of land that was not owned by the HOA at all. In fact, according to county records, it belonged to a land investment company called Meridian Holdings. My heart beat faster as I zoomed in on the satellite view. The parcel was substantial, nearly 15 acres of undeveloped woodland that wrapped around the northern and eastern boundaries of Oak Ridge Estates, and according to the property details, it had been on the market for over a year. For sale, the land was for sale. I reached for my phone with trembling hands and dialed the number of James Williams, a real estate attorney who had helped review my closing documents when I purchased my home. His secretary put me on his calendar for the following morning, and I spent the rest of the day investigating everything I could about Meridian Holdings and their land. James Williams's office was located in a converted Victorian house downtown, its interior modernized with glass and steel, while maintaining the historic exterior charm. He greeted me warmly, remembered Max from photos I had shared during our previous interactions, and listened intently as I explained the situation with the HOA. "Let me make sure I understand," he said, leaning forward across his desk after I had finished my explanation. "You believe the HOA is restricting access to a trail that runs along property they do not own." "That is my suspicion," I replied. "The conservation area they have designated seems to include or at least border this parcel owned by Meridian Holdings. What I need to know is whether they have the legal right to restrict access to an area that borders private property not owned by the association." James pulled up the County Geese system on his computer and entered the information I had provided. He studied the screen, occasionally muttering to himself as he toggled between satellite view and the property boundary overlay. "This is interesting," he finally said. "Based on these boundaries, it appears that the trail itself is on HOA property, but it runs directly adjacent to the Meridian parcel. They are within their rights to restrict activity on their own property, unfortunately." My heart sank. "So they can ban dog walking legally?" "On their property, yes." James paused, a thoughtful expression crossing his face. "But there is something else worth noting here. The Meridian parcel has road access and is zoned for residential development. If someone were to purchase it, they could potentially create their own trail system that would be outside HOA jurisdiction." A light bulb went on in my mind. "How much is the asking price for the Meridian parcel?" James raised an eyebrow. "Are you considering what I think you are considering?" "I am just exploring all options," I replied, trying to keep my voice neutral despite the excitement building within me. James typed rapidly on his keyboard, then turned the screen toward me. The listing for the Meridian parcel appeared, complete with aerial photos and an asking price that made my eyes widen. It was substantial, not something I could afford on a whim, but not entirely out of reach either, especially if I liquidated some investments. "Even if you could purchase the property," James cautioned, "what would you do with it? Development would require significant capital beyond the purchase price." "I am not interested in development," I said slowly, the plan taking shape in my mind. "I am interested in access, in creating a space where arbitrary rules do not apply." James leaned back in his chair, a smile playing at the corners of his mouth. "You want to create a dog park that borders the HOA's conservation area?" "Something like that," I admitted. "Would there be any legal obstacles? Could the HOA block such a move?" "Not if you own the property outright and comply with county zoning regulations," James replied. "The HOA has no jurisdiction over land outside its boundaries. They might not like it, but they would have no legal standing to prevent it." For the first time since receiving that violation notice, I felt a sense of hope, of power returning. I spent the remainder of the consultation discussing potential financing options, property inspection requirements, and the timeline for making an offer. By the time I left James's office, I had a clear action plan and a list of financial documents to gather. That evening, I sat at my kitchen table with a calculator, my investment portfolio statements, and a glass of whiskey. The numbers were daunting but not impossible. I would need to liquidate my stock portfolio, use a substantial portion of my savings, and possibly take out a land loan. It would mean financial sacrifice, postponing other goals like the kitchen renovation I had been planning, and taking on some debt. As I crunched the numbers, Max placed his head in my lap, looking up at me with complete trust. I scratched behind his ears, my resolve strengthening. "What do you think, buddy? Should we buy ourselves some land where no one can tell us where to walk?" His tail thumped against the floor in what I chose to interpret as enthusiastic agreement. I looked out my window toward the wooded trail that had started this whole conflict. Soon, that land, or at least the land adjacent to it, might be mine, and with ownership would come the power that Patricia M. Organ and her HOA board currently wielded so carelessly. The thought brought the first genuine smile to my face in days. This was no longer just about fighting an unfair fine or challenging unreasonable rules. This was about reclaiming control, about standing up to bullies who hid behind bureaucracy and regulations. This was about justice, not just for me and Max, but potentially for every homeowner in Oak Ridge Estates who had ever felt powerless against the HOA's tyranny. The art of secrecy is not something that comes naturally to most people. For the next 2 months, I lived a double life. Outwardly, the compliant resident who had paid his fine under protest, while inwardly orchestrating the largest financial transaction of my life. My first step was contacting the listing agent for the Meridian property. I arranged to meet him on site rather than at his office, where I might be seen by someone from the neighborhood. Jason Reynolds was a commercial land specialist who seemed surprised that an individual rather than a development company was interested in the parcel. "This property has been on the market for 14 months, he explained as we walked the perimeter on a cool spring morning. "Most residential buyers want ready-to-build lots, not raw land that requires infrastructure development." I nodded thoughtfully, careful not to reveal my true motivation. "I appreciate the natural setting. I am looking for a long-term investment that could potentially be developed years down the road." We stood at the edge of the property line that bordered the Oak Ridge Estate's green space. Through the trees, I could see the contested walking trail. Jason followed my gaze. "That is Oak Ridge Estates over there. Nice community, very particular about their rules from what I hear." "So I have heard," I replied neutrally. After the site visit, I moved quickly. A property inspection confirmed what I already suspected. The land was valuable, with good drainage, mature trees, and no environmental issues that would prevent eventual development. My offer was deliberately structured to appeal to the sellers, slightly below asking price but with a quick closing timeline and minimal contingencies. While waiting for a response, I met with my financial advisor to liquidate investments and with a local bank to arrange financing for the portion I could not cover with cash. Each meeting required careful explanation that would not reveal my true purpose. To the financial advisor, this was about diversifying into real estate. To the bank loan officer, it was about acquiring land with future development potential. The strain of maintaining the secret was considerable. Each day, I walked Max on the approved community paths, nodding politely to neighbors who had voted against me at the HOA meeting. I attended a community cleanup day, raked leaves from the common areas, and even exchanged pleasantries with Robert Chen, the HOA secretary, when we crossed paths at the local coffee shop. All the while, I was signing documents, transferring funds, and preparing for closing. 10 days after submitting my offer, Jason called with the news. Meridian Holdings had accepted. We were moving forward. The closing was set for 30 days out, and the countdown began. During those 30 days, I lived in constant anxiety that somehow Patricia or another board member would discover my plan. I scheduled all calls and meetings related to the purchase during my lunch breaks at work or after hours when I could be sure I was not being observed. I had all documents sent to my office rather than my home address. When I needed to sign the final purchase agreement, I drove to a notary 2 towns over rather than using the one at our local bank where I might be recognized. The night before closing, I barely slept. The financial commitment I was making was enormous, nearly all of my liquid assets plus a substantial loan. If something went wrong, if there was a legal challenge I had not anticipated, I could find myself in financial ruin. Doubt crept in as I lay staring at the ceiling. Was I taking this too far? Was revenge against an HOA worth such risk? As if sensing my doubt, Max jumped onto the bed, technically against HOA rules that specified pets must have their own designated sleeping areas, and settled his warm weight against my side. I buried my fingers in his soft fur, remembering the humiliation of that HOA meeting, the dismissive tone of Patricia's voice, the neighbors who had turned against us without hesitation. No, this was not just about revenge. This was about standing up to injustice, about refusing to be bullied. This was about creating a safe space not just for Max and me, but potentially for others who felt oppressed by arbitrary rules and the small-minded people who enforced them. Closing day arrived crisp and clear. I had taken the day off work, telling colleagues I had a medical appointment. The title company I had chosen was located in the next county, eliminating any chance of running into someone from Oak Ridge Estates. As I sat in the sterile conference room, signing document after document, a sense of unreality washed over me. The loan officer slid the final paper across the table, the deed that would transfer ownership of 15 acres of woodland from Meridian Holdings to me. My hand trembled slightly as I signed my name. The loan officer did not seem to notice, but Jason Reynolds, who had attended to receive his commission check, gave me a curious look. "Big moment," he commented. "Not every day an individual purchases a parcel this size. Any immediate plans for the property?" I carefully capped my pen and looked him in the eye. "Conservation, primarily. I believe in preserving natural spaces." It was not entirely a lie. I did value the land for its natural beauty. That I also valued it for the power it would give me went unspoken. As I walked out of the title company clutching the folder containing my deed and property documents, a weight lifted from my shoulders. The secret acquisition phase was complete. Now I needed to consult with James Williams again to ensure I understood exactly what rights my ownership conferred and how best to exercise them. That evening, Max and I took a different route for our walk, circling around to view my property, from a public access point away from the HOA's watchful eyes. The setting sun filtered through the trees, casting long shadows across what was now my land. I pulled the deed from my pocket, unfolded it, and read my name on the ownership line one more time, just to be sure it was real. "Things are about to change around here, Max," I said quietly, looking toward the Oak Ridge Estates community in the distance. "They have no idea what is coming." The monthly HOA meeting was scheduled for 7 o'clock on a Thursday evening. I had circled the date on my calendar the moment the newsletter arrived, not with dread this time, but with anticipation. For 3 weeks since closing on the property, I had been meticulously preparing for this moment, consulting with James Williams about the legal parameters of my plan and collecting every document I would need. The afternoon of the meeting, I laid out my clothing with the care of a general preparing for battle. A crisp blue button-down shirt that conveyed seriousness without aggression, khaki pants freshly pressed, my best leather shoes polished to a shine. The portfolio I had purchased specifically for this occasion sat on my desk, filled with copies of the deed, property surveys, county records, and a carefully crafted statement of intent. I arrived at the community center 15 minutes before the meeting was scheduled to begin, just as I had for the previous confrontation. But this time, I chose a seat in the front row, directly facing the board table. Several board members were already present, arranging their materials and chatting among themselves. Thomas Bradford nodded politely in my direction, likely assuming I was there to follow up on the fine I had paid. Susan Miller gave me a small, almost apologetic smile. Patricia Morgan was notably absent, likely making a planned grand entrance as was her custom. Right on cue, at 6:58, Patricia strode into the room, briefcase in hand. She took her seat at the center of the table without acknowledging the residents gathered before her. At precisely 7 o'clock, she called the meeting to order, her voice carrying the same authoritative tone I had come to despise. Welcome to the April meeting of the Oak Ridge Estates Homeowners Association. We will begin with the approval of last month's minutes. I sat patiently through the routine business items, my portfolio resting on my lap, my heart rate steadily increasing as the open forum portion of the meeting approached. Around me, residents shifted in their seats, some looking bored, others preparing their own comments about speed bumps and landscaping concerns. Finally, Patricia reached the portion of the agenda I had been waiting for. We will now open the floor for community comments. Please limit your remarks to 3 minutes. Who would like to begin? Before anyone else could respond, I raised my hand. Patricia noticed immediately, her expression betraying a flicker of annoyance before she composed herself. Mr. Anderson, the floor is yours. Please approach the podium. I walked to the podium slowly, deliberately, setting my portfolio down and carefully extracting the first document, the property deed. My hands were steady now, my nervousness replaced by a calm certainty. Good evening. For those who do not know me, my name is Michael Anderson from 1432 Crescent Hill Drive. I am here to discuss an important development regarding the property adjacent to our community, particularly the area bordering what the HOA has designated as a conservation zone. Patricia leaned forward slightly, her brow furrowing. This was clearly not the topic she had expected. As many of you know, I received a violation notice and fine 2 months ago for walking my dog in the wooded trail area that has been designated as restricted. After that incident, I became curious about the exact boundaries of our community and the legal jurisdiction of the HOA. I unfolded a large survey map and placed it on the document camera, allowing it to be projected onto the screen behind the board table. The room fell silent as residents leaned forward to see the detailed property lines. This is the official county survey map showing Oak Ridge Estates and the surrounding properties. You will notice that our community green space, I used a laser pointer to trace the area, borders directly against a 15-acre parcel previously owned by Meridian Holdings. Thomas Bradford adjusted his glasses, studying the map with growing interest. Mr. Anderson, while this is certainly informative, is there a specific HOA matter you wish to address? Property outside our boundaries is not within our jurisdiction. I am getting to that, I replied calmly. The reason this adjacent property is relevant to the HOA is because, as of 3 weeks ago, I am now the legal owner of this parcel. A murmur spread through the room like wildfire. I placed the property deed on the document camera, my name clearly visible on the ownership line. The whispers grew louder as the implications began to dawn on the residents. Patricia's face had gone pale. Mr. Anderson, I fail to see how your private property purchase is relevant to HOA business. It is relevant because this property borders directly against the conservation area where I was fined for walking my dog. It is relevant because the HOA has been enforcing rules about land that directly abuts my private property. I placed another document on the camera, a survey showing the exact boundaries between the HOA green space and my newly acquired woodland. As you can see, The trail runs exactly along the property line. Robert Chen leaned toward Patricia, whispering something in her ear. She shook her head slightly, her composure visibly slipping. Furthermore, I continued, county regulations permit me, as the landowner, to determine who has access to my property. I have prepared a document outlining my intentions regarding this land. I placed my statement of intent on the camera. The room fell completely silent as people read the projected text. Thomas Bradford's mouth actually fell open. As you can see, effective immediately, I am designating my entire 15 acres as a private nature preserve. Access to this preserve will be restricted to individuals who have signed my access agreement and received an authorized entry pass. Patricia found her voice, though it lacked its usual authority. You cannot restrict Oak Ridge residents from using established community paths. The community paths on HOA property remain under HOA jurisdiction, I agreed reasonably. However, the moment anyone steps across this boundary line, I trace the property line with my laser pointer again. They are on my private property and subject to my rules. This is preposterous, Patricia sputtered. You purchased this land specifically to circumvent HOA regulations. I looked her directly in the eye. I purchased this land because I value natural spaces and believe they should be accessible to responsible users, including dog owners. From my portfolio, I extracted another document and placed it on the camera. This one displayed my new property rules, deliberately crafted to mirror the format of the HOA's own regulations. As you can see in Section 3 of my private property regulations, current board members of the Oak Ridge Estates HOA are expressly prohibited from entering my nature preserve at any time, for any reason. Gasps echoed through the community center. Patricia's face had progressed from pale to flushed with anger. Additionally, I continued, any resident who voted in favor of the dog walking restriction or reported violations of said restriction is similarly prohibited from accessing my property. Thomas Bradford was frantically flipping through what appeared to be the HOA legal guidelines. You cannot discriminate against HOA officials in this manner, he protested. Actually, I can, I replied, placing James Williams's legal opinion letter on the camera. As my attorney has confirmed, private property owners have broad discretion regarding who they permit to access their land, provided they do not discriminate based on legally protected classes. HOA board member is not a protected class. The room erupted in chaos. Some residents were on their feet, shouting questions. Others were laughing openly at the board's discomfort. Patricia banged her gavel repeatedly, trying to restore order, but the damage was done. Her authority was crumbling before my eyes. Furthermore, I projected my voice over the noise without Howding, I am establishing a dedicated dog walking trail on my property, running parallel to, but separate from the HOA conservation area. Any resident who signs my reasonable pet owner agreement will be granted an access pass. The chaos doubled. I could see clear division in the room, some residents looking outraged, others looking delighted by this turn of events. Patricia continued banging her gavel until it actually broke, the head flying off and skittering across the table. "This meeting will come to order," she shouted, her composure completely shattered. "Mr. Anderson, you have exceeded your allotted time." I gathered my documents calmly, replacing them in my portfolio. "Thank you for allowing me to make this announcement. Information packets about accessing the new nature preserve will be available next week. Have a pleasant evening." As I turned to leave the podium, Patricia rose from her seat, her voice shaking with rage. "This is not over, Mr. Anderson. The board will be consulting our attorneys about this blatant attempt to undermine community regulations." I paused, turning back to face her with a smile. "You are welcome to do so, Ms. Morgan. However, I believe you will find that even the most expensive attorneys cannot change the basic property rights guaranteed by law. The land is mine. The rules are mine. And unlike the HOA, I intend to create a space where people feel welcome rather than policed." The meeting dissolved into multiple heated conversations. As I walked toward the exit, residents approached me from all sides, some congratulating me, others demanding more information, a few expressing outrage at what they saw as a betrayal of community standards. Through it all, I maintained a calm, reasonable demeanor, answering questions honestly but refusing to be drawn into arguments. Just before I reached the door, Susan Miller caught up with me, speaking in a low voice. That was either the bravest or craziest thing I have ever seen at an HOA meeting. "Sometimes standing up to bullies requires extreme measures," I replied. She glanced back at Patricia, who was engaged in what appeared to be a heated argument with Thomas and Robert. For what it is worth, I opposed the dog-walking restriction. It seemed unnecessarily punitive. "Then you will be welcome on my nature preserve," I told her, "along with anyone else who believes in reasonable rules applied with compassion rather than power trips." As I walked to my car, I could see lights on in homes throughout the neighborhood, residents no doubt already making phone calls to spread the news of what had transpired. The community would never be the same. The balance of power had shifted irrevocably, and it felt absolutely exhilarating. The transformation of Oak Ridge Estates happened more quickly than I could have imagined. Within a week of the revealing HOA meeting, two distinct factions had formed in the community: those who supported my property rights stance, and those who remained aligned with Patricia and the existing board. Lawn signs began appearing, unofficial of course, as such displays violated HOA regulations, with slogans like "Property Rights Matter" and "Support Responsible Dog Owners." The first visible change was the installation of professional boundary markers along the property line between the HOA green space and my nature preserve. I hired surveyors to place small but unmistakable markers at regular intervals, each bearing the words, "Private property beyond this point, access by permit only." Beside each marker, I added a small box containing information about how to obtain access permits. As promised, I created a simple one-page responsible land use agreement that residents could sign to receive an access pass. The rules were straightforward: stay on marked trails, clean up after pets, respect wildlife, no littering, and no harassing other users. Unlike the HOA's dense, punitive regulations, my agreement focused on mutual respect and common sense. The response was overwhelming. Within days, over 60 households, more than half the community, had signed the agreement and received access passes. Each pass included a small tag that could be attached to dog leashes or carried by residents, easily visible to demonstrate authorized access. Patricia and the HOA board were not idle during this time. First came the cease and desist letter from their attorney, claiming my actions constituted a deliberate attempt to circumvent community regulations. James Williams responded with a firmly worded legal opinion, reiterating private property rights and suggesting that any attempt by the HOA to interfere would result in countersuit. Next came the emergency HOA meeting, called specifically to address what Patricia termed the nature preserve crisis. I attended, sitting quietly as board members proposed various strategies for fighting back, from threatening homeowners who signed my agreement with violations to attempting to purchase a strip of land between the communities to create a buffer zone. Each proposal was met with increasing resistance from residents who had grown tired of the board's heavy-handed tactics. The most surprising development came 3 weeks after my announcement. A knock at my door one evening revealed Helen Wilson, the same neighbor who had spoken against me at the original meeting. "I owe you an apology," she said, standing awkwardly on my porch. "I should never have reported you for walking your dog. Patricia convinced several of us that there were incidents of aggressive dogs and unscooped waste, but I have realized she was exaggerating to push through her anti-dog agenda." She was not the only one to approach me privately. Over the following days, multiple neighbors shared similar stories of how they had been manipulated by Patricia's selective enforcement of rules and divisive tactics. The community that had once felt fractured was slowly beginning to heal, not under HOA direction, but through genuine neighbor-to-neighbor conversations. 1 month after the revelation meeting, I officially opened the dog-walking trail on my property. It was a beautiful path that wound through the woods, with small clearings where people and pets could rest on rustic benches I had installed. The grand opening was attended by dozens of residents and their dogs, a joyful gathering that felt more genuine than any HOA-sanctioned event I had attended. Patricia Morgan was conspicuously absent, as were the other board members. Rumor had it she was considering selling her home and moving to a more structured community. The following month, an unprecedented number of candidates put themselves forward for the HOA board election, including several who openly advocated for more reasonable, compassionate governance. Standing on my property on a bright spring morning, watching Max play with other neighborhood dogs while their owners chatted amicably, I reflected on how a simple act of injustice had led to such significant change. The land purchase had been expensive, yes, but the return on investment was beyond monetary value. I had not just created a space where Max and I could walk freely. I had helped create a community where power was balanced, where rules served people rather than controlling them. In the distance, I could see the boundary markers between the HOA property and my nature preserve. But the line they represented was becoming increasingly blurred as neighbors from both sides came together, finding common ground in our shared humanity rather than our differences. Max bounded up to me, tennis ball in mouth, oblivious to the community politics his walks had unleashed. I threw the ball for him, watching him race across land that was ours, yet shared with those who understood that communities are built on respect, not restrictions. Sometimes justice requires bold action. Sometimes standing up to bullies means changing the playing field entirely. And sometimes the best revenge is not just winning, but creating something better from the ashes of conflict. For every resident who now enjoyed the freedom of my nature preserve, for every dog who ran happily along the woodland trails, for every conversation that built bridges instead of walls, this was the true victory. Not because I had banned the HOA, but because I had helped create a space where banning was no longer necessary.